Chapter 8. David Goes to England. My life seemed unfettered to me as I traveled back home. That is the best word I can think of to describe it. Unfettered. I did not seem to have any inhibitions. I became more willing to do just about anything. It wasn't as though I turned from Casper Milquetoast into Superman, but I was less troubled by things. Emotionally, I was freer. Outwardly, I may not have looked much different. Inwardly, subjectively, I felt different, and it was definitely for the better. More than worth the investment I had made in time and money. By then, I probably had spent about $5,000, which is a pittance compared to what dedicated Scientologists have to pay today. My relationships with people were always good, save for my marriage to Loretta. On the way back from the airport, I had to switch from driving on the left-hand side of the road to the right-hand side, and this became a little irritating. My frustration leaked out, and Loretta remarked, "I thought that when you went clear, you would be nicer." I let it drop. In fact, I have always been extroverted, and Scientology only made me more so. I also would not back down from a confrontation if I was not in the wrong. That's how I was, and Loretta knew it. Scientology had not made me more aggressive. If anything, I became less confrontational, because not much bothered me anymore. I was able to let stuff roll off my back, including Loretta's barbs. Years later, she said, "I always wanted to marry a conservative guy." Wow, how much more wrong could she have gotten? Loretta mainly wanted to get married so she could have kids. Nothing at all wrong with that, and she was good with the kids. Great, even. She had a problem with me, something that her involvement with Scientology had no great effect on, one way or the other. I began making plans to take the whole family back to England the next year, but I had talked with Loretta about her going to St. Hill first, during the summer of 1971, just after I returned. I paid for her to take the courses I had just completed, plus some even more advanced levels. She was on board with the idea, and other Scientologists she knew were also headed over. So that June, Loretta went to England to take her advanced courses. While she was away, I was working and taking care of our 4 kids. I thought it would be easier if I brought my mother down from Mount Carmel to help me. That was a mistake. With all due respect, looking after kids was not her strong suit. One day we painted the kitchen yellow with brown trim. David and the other kids helped. When we finished, I asked, "Well, what do you think?" They looked at it for a while and said, "Face it, Dad, it looks like crap." So I went back to the paint store and bought white paint, mixed in a little blue and got powder blue for the trim, and we stayed up until 2 the next morning repainting the whole kitchen. The first attempt had barely dried, and we were at it again. The kids stayed up and helped, and this time it looked great. The next day, I got more of the powder blue trim paint, and we painted our wooden kitchen table and chairs. I had the chairs drying in the living room, and my mother sat on one that was still wet. At that point, I said, "Mom, this isn't working. I'm taking you back home." Meanwhile, Loretta had not called once from England. I finally called her and asked, "How come you're not calling? How's it going? How was your auditing?" "Oh, it was fine. It's good," she said noncommittally. I don't think Scientology ever had the same impact on her life as it had on mine. At one point, she even suggested that we move back to Mount Carmel, which would have more or less meant leaving Scientology since there was no center in the town. The most important thing in my life in those days was Scientology. Still, Loretta remained active in Scientology for the rest of her life and ascended to the most advanced levels. In the early years, though, I think her main reason for participating, as I said earlier, was her hope that it would make me a better person. Nevertheless, after school let out for the summer of 1972, the whole family went to East Grinstead. We were there for the next 15 months until September 1973. We had sold the house, and off we went with all our savings. To some extent, it was a roll of the dice, but I looked at it as an adventure. I was searching for a way for me and my family to make more rapid progress through Scientology. It had improved my life radically, and I felt that it would be a good way for my kids to improve their chances for success, too. When we left the United States, Ronnie was 15. Dave and Denise were 12, and Laurie was 10. When I brought up the idea, they were all for it. Loretta was less enthusiastic, especially because the kids would miss a year of school while in England. But she agreed that it would be good for the family overall. East Grinstead is a pretty little town with many historic buildings about an hour's train ride south of London. We rented a house there. The owner's wife did such a thorough job of cleaning the place for us that she even emptied the salt and pepper shakers. When we arrived, we were starving, but there was not so much as a stale crust of bread to be found. It happened to be a bank holiday, so almost everything was closed, but fortunately we found an open sandwich shop. That was our welcome to East Grinstead. I bought a car, an Austin Westminster that was large enough to put all 4 kids in the back, so we could drive the mile or so from our house to St. Hill. I always bought cars from the same guy. I made several trips to England during the 1970s and always picked up a used car from him for £100 or so. Real cheap. One car had a hole in the floorboard, and you could watch the road going by as you drove. The first Scientology service we all took was a study course. Then I did more advanced auditing services, while Loretta and the kids all began training to become Scientology practitioners or auditors. In those days, the place was packed. There must have been hundreds of people studying. Today, I would be surprised if there were a fraction of that. Press reports indicate that the 2011 British census found only 2,418 self-identifying Scientologists across England and Wales. Life in England was good for the whole family. On Friday nights, we usually went to a fish and chips shop for dinner. David, Denise, and Ronnie became trained to audit people. Laurie decided she wasn't interested, and we did not push her. She was the only child who was in school during that time. The others were doing Scientology training at St. Hill full-time. That was their schooling. My view was that they would learn more of value by studying Scientology. This was a point of friction between Loretta and me, because she thought the kids ought to be in school. The kids sided with me on this point, though, and we won out in the end. Loretta, though perhaps not as engaged as the rest of us, still was actively studying on the same schedule. Her dream was to one day establish a Scientology center in the United States, where the whole family could work and enjoy the togetherness she'd had with her family while she was growing up in Mount Carmel. Meanwhile, David was enjoying his studies and doing well. He was not a troublemaker. In fact, he was a model student. He tried his best to do everything by the book. Also training at St. Hill at the time was a woman named Helen Whitney, who ran a Scientology mission, a smaller version of a church that delivered introductory services in New Jersey. One day she asked David to inspect a clay model she had made as part of a course assignment. Scientology is big on having students take a concept they have studied and model it in clay, on the theory that it helps the student grasp the concept better by making it more real. For example, you could be asked to make a clay demonstration of the difference between a person and his mind. You might take some clay and mold it into a body several inches tall. You would then take a slip of paper and write "body" and stick the label on the figure. Then you might roll out a narrow ring with more clay and place this on your table so it surrounds the figure, and label this new piece "mind." Finally, you could take some smaller blobs of clay and place them inside the ring and label them "memory" to show what the mind contains. The basic idea is to make an idea more real by creating it in 3 dimensions. After a student makes the demonstration, another student or the course supervisor inspects it to see if it does, in fact, illustrate the concept. At any rate, Helen asked David to check out her clay demonstration. David looked it over, studied it for a minute, and pronounced "flunk." This is what a student is supposed to say when the model does not clearly show the concept being demonstrated. Helen was taken aback and even came over to me and said, "I don't know what to say about David, but I don't know if he is in his right mind. He flunked my clay demo." "Oh, Helen, come on," I replied. "Dave, are you going to back down on this?" "No way I'm going to back down. I don't see it in the demo." And that was that. He was fastidious about doing everything according to standards, which is the mantra hammered into every student. 100% standard tech. Technology. Be standard. Standard, standard, standard. Dave bought into it wholeheartedly. A few years before, Scientology had cured his asthma, so he had a strong motivation to do things right. He took it seriously because he had personal experience with what a good application could do. Another student was learning to use the e-meter. One of the drills consisted of calling off lists of various fruits, vegetables, dogs, types of flowers, and such, and noting any reaction on the meter. The purpose was to gain practice in doing what is called an assessment, so that when it came time to do the real thing in an auditing session, the auditor could do it smoothly. Basically, an assessment is a procedure to help locate something to address in the auditing session. The auditor has a list of items that might cause the meter's needle to react. The theory is that when the list is read aloud, the item that shows the greatest reaction is the one to address. The auditor simply calls off the first item on the list, notes whether the needle reacts, and proceeds through the list until it becomes clear which item on the list should be taken up for discussion. Say a person is having problems with different people in his life. To identify the first person the auditee needs to address in the session, the auditor asks the person who he might be having trouble with, and he lists them. Let's see, there's my father, my sister, my girlfriend. Oh, yeah, my English professor. There's one of my roommates, and my mother. That's all I can think of. These might cause a reaction as he thinks of them, but if uncertain, the auditor can then simply call off each item again and note the reaction. That is an assessment and how it is used in auditing. This student, who was not a native English speaker, had the habit of mispronouncing the word asparagus, which was one of the practice items on a list of vegetables. He always mispronounced it asparagus. We all heard him saying this in the course room, but David was the only one who pointed it out and told him how to say the word correctly. The guy really appreciated it. David was always determined to do everything correctly, chapter and verse, and help others to do it that way too. The course ended at about 5 p.m. each day, and then we usually shopped for food before the stores closed, went home and made dinner. After dinner, we all just kind of hung out until it was time for bed. The next morning, we got up, ate breakfast, and headed off to the course again. That pretty much describes our family life for the whole time we were at St. Hill. When I reflect on that period, I can see it was a great time to be a Scientologist in England. As I said, the place was crowded. A grassy hillside opposite the church facilities was always filled at lunchtime, with people enjoying a bite and chatting, spending time with their families, or just relaxing in the sun. On a sunny day, that is. We usually went to the canteen to buy something to eat and sat out on the lush grass to enjoy our break. A fabulous camaraderie existed among the people there. We shared a feeling that Scientology was something that was going to help everyone, the world, oneself, one's family, everybody. The expectations of what Scientology could do for people were really high. It infused the entire culture around St. Hill with a positive, hopeful atmosphere. Cottage industries sprung up that manufactured leather or wooden cases to put your e-meter and study materials in. People were contributing to the movement because they wanted to, not because they were being badgered or shamed into it as they are today. People regularly dropped in at our house for a meal or simply to talk. Our door was always open, and anybody was welcome. It was very laissez-faire living and really wonderful. We loved going into the shops in town. The store owners definitely appreciated the extra business that Scientologists brought to East Grinstead. One time I went into W.H. Smith, a bookshop, to look for a particular dictionary. Hubbard placed a lot of emphasis on knowing the meanings of words you encountered in your studies, so students were always buying dictionaries. I asked the shopkeeper for the dictionary that was currently in favor around St. Hill. He said with some consternation, "Hold on, you mean you don't want the World Book Dictionary? Will you people please make up your minds? I've got a room full of them in the back." Everything about East Grinstead was different and quaint. I loved the place. Another time I went into a grocery store and asked for aluminum foil. "We don't do that," I was told. For some reason, I had to go back to Smith's to buy aluminum foil. Go figure. Housewives shopped daily for ingredients. You'd see them out pushing their perambulators, their baby's cheeks a healthy red from the chill. You could go into a store and buy a quarter of a cucumber. Our weekends were fairly routine. We cleaned the house and went to town. The markets in East Grinstead held auctions of such things as cuts of meat, and it was fascinating to see people bidding for a leg of lamb. "I bid 15 shillings, 16 shillings, 17. Around Christmas, we took a trip out to Eastbourne on the English Channel. We went to a restaurant with an enclosed porch and windows all around. We sat there and had tea and scones with double cream and jam. It was enjoyable for everyone in the family. We watched the waves churning up against the cliffs and felt the pleasure of each other's company. When I wasn't working on my progress in Scientology, I wanted to get something going with my music. I was playing trumpet at the Dorset Arms Hotel in East Grinstead on Friday and Saturday nights. I had put together a band, and we played jazz standards, some Dixieland and popular hits, and we packed the place on both nights every week. The crowd was a mixture of townspeople and Scientologists. They loved us. The band had a positive effect on the relationship between St. Hill and the town, because things were generally not good between Scientologists and the locals. For a small town, the population was maybe 20,000 at the time, at a guess, East Grinstead was home to a great diversity and large number of church denominations and other religious organizations. Mainstream Christianity had a strong presence, and it doesn't take a lot to imagine how conservative groups must have viewed Hubbard and the Scientologists' unconventional and secretive ways. Still, I would be walking through town shopping, and random people would stop me to say, "Ron, how you doing?" I was known as Ron Savage. I figured that Miscavige would be too hard for people to remember. At one point, the town held a contest to select a band to go to East Grinstead's sister city in France, Bourg-de-Péage. My band entered, and lo and behold, we won. Here we were, a band made up of Scientologists, and we would be representing East Grinstead in France. The East Grinstead Courier had this headline on its back page: "We were trying to get rid of them. Now they're representing us." We went to France for a week and had a fantastic time. People in town asked us for autographs. For that week we were celebrities. The East Grinstead Town Council was proud because the crowd loved our performances. We were invited by the Bourg-de-Péage town treasurer, which is a more powerful position than mayor because the treasurer holds the purse strings, to his home for a sumptuous meal. What a house! Marble floors and everything. We stuffed ourselves from noon until 4 p.m. and collapsed into easy chairs. Then he served us Pernod with water. Even his kids were drinking it. When we went back to England, the gigs at the hotel continued, and so did the band's positive effect on relations between the town and Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard even went so far as to commend us for the good work we were doing. Not that that was our main purpose. We just wanted to play music and earn some money. At the time, Hubbard was living aboard a cattle steamer that had been converted into a yacht and renamed Apollo. He was sailing around the Mediterranean and North Africa, continuing his writing and research while conveniently staying away from government agencies that might have wanted a word with him. Most Scientologists were unaware that he was trying to avoid legal troubles. To us, he was simply the founder of Scientology, and a man who was doing immense good for the world. We all held him in the highest regard, even though most Scientologists, including me, had never met him. After we received that commendation, I wrote to him on the Apollo and said that we needed some help with instruments. Our piano player just played whatever piano we found at the venue. Our bass player needed a speaker for his bass. LRH wrote back and said that we were to be given whatever we needed. By the summer of 1973, though, my money was pretty well used up, and the family had to move back to the United States. We had all made a lot of progress in Scientology, but we needed me to go back to work. There was no great sense of disappointment. That's just the way things were. Upon our return in September, we lived in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and the kids went back to school. I went back to selling cookware and still played some music. I always did well at the cookware gig. My first year selling full-time, 1959, I was the 5th most productive salesperson out of 3,000 in the country. Like music, selling was something I just took to. The kids readapted easily. They all still did well in school. Ronnie was in high school now, and David and Denise were in junior high. Denise ran for the track team and did great. She was a really fast runner. Ronnie was on the gymnastics team. David did not participate in any sports until he got to high school, and then he wrestled. His asthma was never an issue at that time. I never heard that he was bullied, even though he was still small, and he was no longer coming home and complaining about some kid at school. There was one issue, however. A lot of kids in school were now using drugs, smoking pot, which became a problem. One day I came home and found Ronnie sitting on the couch looking glum. "What's up, Ronnie?" I asked. "Nothing, Dad." "What do you mean, nothing?" I could see it all over his face that something was going on. "Come on, what is it?" "There is a kid at school who was selling drugs. And I told him, if I ever catch you selling drugs to my sisters or my brother, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. And he said, well, if you beat me up, I'll have you killed." I was floored. People could say and do a lot to me, but if anyone came after my family, there was no limit to what I would do to protect them. I went upstairs and put on a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and an old jacket, and grabbed a pair of leather gloves. "Come on out to the car, Ronnie." "Where are we going?" he asked. "Just come out to the car." "Where does the kid live?" I said as we began driving. We found the house. "Is that it?" "Yeah." "Okay, come with me." "What are you going to do, Dad?" I was steamed, and Ronnie wasn't quite sure what was about to happen. "Just come with me," I said. We went up to the door. I rapped on it. The father opened it. "Get everybody down here," I demanded. His wife and 2 kids came down. I was pretty mad. "Listen, this kid here," I said, motioning to one, "threatened to have my son killed." I demanded an apology and let them know that it had better not happen again. The kid apologized profusely, and his father said, "This will never happen again." "Okay," I said, and we left. Ronnie never had any trouble with that kid again.